I, oh, there we go. And I coordinate the parent groups for IDALA. And sometimes we do them virtually. Sometimes we do them in person as well. So you'll see things that'll come out on our email, our website about in-person ones. And we have one on the west side. And we also have one in the Pasadena area. So those will be coming up this spring. And I think we're going to be doing a simulation in the Pasadena area one that later this spring. And the west side one doesn't quite sure. They don't have their topic yet for spring. But let me just tell you briefly about IDALA. We're part of the International Dyslexia Association, which is a national organization that supports parents and individuals and children actually with dyslexia. And our big push is about teacher training and awareness. We have a really great conference coming up in March. And it's going to be at UCLA. It's a full day conference. If you're a teacher, there are scholarships available. You can apply for that. But it's not just for teachers. Administrators come, physicians come, parents come, and people often say it's probably one of the best conferences to go to all year. Not to brag, but it's people say that. So we're very pleased to be part of that and to present that. So if you go on our website, you can see more about it. And that's coming up in March, and registration is open for that. It's a full day, includes a really nice lunch as part of that. So you won't miss out. We don't want you to miss out. It's a wonderful time. Let me see. So tonight we've got strategies to support executive function at home, brought by two educational therapists, Hannah Ross, who is actually vice president of our board, and her colleague and friend, Jenny Aguilar. Drennan. She just got married. She's switching a name over, but you might know her by Aguilar, or she's going by Drennan. So they're going to present tonight. We're going to have a little Q&A at the end for you. And if you have questions, pop them in the chat, okay, as they speak, and they'll be addressing those either as they go or at the end. And we ask you to put your camera or your microphones on mute. That would be great. And if you want to chime in, do so on the chat. That's what it's there for. So Jenny and Hannah, thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to hearing you tonight.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Barb. It's great to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get to it. And thank you so much. Great to hear everyone in the chat chiming in with their children's age and where they're located. It's really cool to see lots of people from LA, but I see someone from Florida, from Georgia. I see parents, educational therapists, lots of different people here tonight, which is really fun to see the wide variety of people coming to join and kind of learning more about executive function skills and how we can best support students. Right, here we go.
For dropping in your children's ages as well, as so that we can kind of center the presentation around children that are around your age. So we see a lot of preteens, a lot of teens here. So that will be fun.
Awesome. All right, so our plan for this evening, we're going to go ahead and start. Barb gave a lovely introduction. We're just going to introduce ourselves a little bit more. We're just going to talk about executive function 101. I know there's probably differing levels of knowledge of executive function skills. So we're going to kind of go over the basics of what those are. We're going to talk about what executive function struggles look like at home and at school. We'll talk about why students and adults struggle with executive function. And then we'll talk about some strategies that you can use to support executive function in your learners. And finally, we'll have a nice question and answer time at the end where you can ask some more specific questions about executive function, things more tailored to your learners. So like we said, you're welcome to put questions in the chat as we go. If it's relevant to the slide we're on, we may jump in and say it, or we might save it to the end as well. But we really do want to hear from everyone. This is meant to be a time where parents and professionals can get together and kind of dialogue about challenges we face. All right.
So I am Jenny Drennan, and I am an educational therapist. We're both former teachers. We're coming out of the classroom, and we both have our own private practice now as educational therapists. and we support neurodivergent learners. So I specialize in supporting students who have ADHD. I'd say 90% of my students have ADHD, from anywhere from 3rd grade to adult, and dyscalculia and written expression. And then Hannah.
Yeah, also educational therapists, we have similar backgrounds. I do work a lot with students with dyslexia, and I'm very involved in IDALA, which is wonderful. And what I will say, how this all ties to executive function is many of our students, regardless if they have a diagnosis, or they're just struggling for whatever reason, many of them do have challenges with executive function. So we find that we are constantly addressing these areas with parents and with students. So it is such an important thing for us to talk about. And with that, what are executive function skills? So you might have heard this term come up. I feel like I've heard it a lot more in the last 5 or so years. And there's a couple different ways you might look at it. Most, in this simplest sense, executive function skills are a set of mental skills that we use every day to learn, work, and successfully accomplish tasks. They're really the skills we use to get stuff done, whether that's at home or at school, but they're very important for almost every aspect of our day-to-day life.
Yeah, and so Russell Barkley and Tom Brown, you'll see different professionals who categorize these skills into different groups. And Russell Barkley and Tom Brown have both spearheaded the research on EF skills and ADHD. And they've categorized them into these. Peg Dawson's done her own. For the purposes of our presentation and to talk in friendly terms, we're going to say that executive function skills are our inner dialogue. So it's sort of your self-talk, your inner coach that talks you into getting from point A to point B. And so you will see that our students struggle, and adults who struggle here really are developing that self-talk.
Yeah, I love that. So because of that, we like to really think of executive function in the simple terms for our students. So usually as I'm working with students, I'll think about executive function as the umbrella term that encompasses all these other different skills, from planning, organization, focus, time management, task initiation, memory, self-control, attention, perseverance, metacognition, flexibility. As you can see, there's a lot of skills here. So executive function really incorporates all of these skills. And it's kind of like your executive function is, like Jenny said, your coach that's telling you, okay, we need to get something done in a timely manner. What's the plan to make this happen? How are we going to persevere when the task is hard? So our inner dialogue is constantly helping, or that's the goal, helping students be able to have and use all these skills in their daily life. I think one thing it's important to note as we look at all these different skills that fall under the category of executive function, that everyone has executive function skills that are natural strengths and natural weaknesses for them. I know even if I think about myself, I'm pretty good at planning ahead. I can always plan what I'm going to do on the weekend and a plan for a trip, but I'm not always so great at my working memory. I'm always misplacing my phone or forgetting if I've gotten something at the grocery store. So that's a weakness for me. So even us as adults, we all have areas of executive function weakness in one or more of these areas. And we also have areas of executive function strengths. So tonight, as we're talking about these skills, you might start to notice, oh, my student is really good at this skill, but they struggle at this other skill. And that's really quite common for challenges to be in one area or the other. So that's kind of an important thing to note as parents and as educators.
Yeah, and to talk just a little more, all of us, right, as Hannah said, we have these strengths, and all of our strengths are also some of our biggest weaknesses. So you'll see several of us so attention is a big executive function skill. This is the ability to manage your attention. So a lot of you will say, but my child can hyper focus, right? They can get lost and do 2 hours of one activity and no problem at all. But in other areas, they really struggle to sustain their attention. So that's where we see that it could be, all of these skills could be strengths, and they can also be big challenges. And it's really how we can support them. And what ultimately what we're trying to do here is bring awareness into what their strengths are and how they can also be somewhat debilitating and weak for them, so that we can begin to build awareness and then they can begin to learn to manage themselves.
Yeah, and as we're about to talk about some of what executive function struggles can look like, if you would like, you're welcome to add into the chat what you notice your learner or even your biggest executive function struggle is, because we of course are going to talk about strategies for supporting those struggles. So feel free to enter in the chat which of these areas you notice your learner really struggles with, and we're going to talk about what you might notice at home if your child does struggle with some executive function skills. So first, we will note that both students and adults could struggle with executive function. And this is what you might see. For your child, you might notice a student who could hyper focus on something they really enjoy, a preferred task, maybe video games. But as soon as you're trying to encourage them to do another task, that big research paper, their math homework, that becomes very challenging. All of a sudden, their attention, they're quite distracted, their attention's all over the place. How could they sit down and play video games for 4 hours, but all of a sudden they can't sit and complete their math homework for 5 minutes? Students who struggle with executive function really struggle with non-preferred tasks, the tasks that are challenging and boring, the tasks they don't want to complete. So that's really a struggle parents oftentimes notice. My student can focus so well on this one area, but as soon as we're doing something else, that focus is gone. You might also notice at home a child who has that messy bedroom, their space around them is always messy, their backpack, their working space. Things are all over the place and they just can't find the things they need. Maybe they are always the student who is losing their jacket or their water bottle at school. That's a very common complaint of students, of parents, when we're noticing those executive function challenges. You might also see that your child is frequently forgetting things, whether that's like the simple daily routine things, what parts of getting ready in the morning, or just important aspects of their homework that they need to complete. So those might be some things that resonate with you as things you have noticed at home when your students are struggling. Now, for adults can also struggle with the executive function skills as well, and it looks different. As adults, most of us find ways to compensate for those skills, and since we don't have to attend school and complete homework and turn them in, it's not always as obvious. Perhaps in a struggle with executive function for an adult looks like that laundry pile that never gets done, that non-preferred task you're always putting off, or perhaps it really looks like kind of a disorganized schedule, not sure when things are going to get done. um, Multitasking, which I always am doing, trying to complete everything on the checklist, but not really knowing how to best manage that time. So I'm sure if you take a moment and think, I'm sure you can notice one of these things that probably resonates with you and that you've noticed that either you or your child has struggled with at home.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of people drop in the chat. Task initiation is one that students struggle with, and we as well, right? And I do want to make the distinction that there is a difference between motivation. There's task initiation, which is an EF still, and buy-in. So I just want to make that distinction because it's important for us to identify which it is so that we can provide proper support. So motivation is when it has a different energy, right? It's kind of broad picture. They really want to do it. They're intrinsically motivated to do it. Buy-in, it could be something that they see the value of it, but they're not necessarily motivated. So just as an example, my holiday decorations, I was bought into putting them away, right? The first weekend after Christmas. However, I wasn't motivated to do that. So you can notice the difference. And then if a student struggles with executive function skills, that's the third difference, because they could be bought in, they could be motivated, but perhaps they're missing some EF skills such as sequencing, flexibility, organization, etc., that will help them move from point A to point B. So there are three different distinctions. And for our presentation, we could really do a deep dive into all these EF skills, motivation, buying, etc., for hours. We're going to touch really briefly on them all, just to kind of get a broad overview of everything.
Okay, and of course, and Jenny, I'll let you talk about executive function at school, because we all know that's really where the problem can certainly come up.
Yeah, so this is where teachers normally see these, right? So it could be someone who is daydreaming in class, and it's an overabundance of attention that's out of their control. And so you'll see that all of a sudden, when they catch themselves, they've already lost track of the conversation, instructions, and they're looking around to see what everyone else around them is doing to kind of help them support themselves to get onto pace. Someone who's frustrated, right? Someone who's really has trouble managing their emotions, dealing with a setback or something that's difficult. It could be someone who is trying to like fidget. So you'll see a lot of students who begin to play with trinkets in their desk. They begin to cut things, glue things around, right? And then organization. So they're constantly losing their supplies, their backpack, their desk, and it despite their best efforts, they just can't seem to keep up. And so what this may look like is, we both hate this term, but it may look like they're messy, or they're lazy, or they just don't care. And I really want everyone to take a different perspective on that, because this is a neurological behavior, right? It's something that is truly out of their capabilities at the moment, and they're working on developing those skills. And with proper support, they will develop those skills. So really, we want to remove the shame of them feeling like they're lazy or incapable.
Yeah, and I do think it's so important to note that executive function and struggles with executive function have nothing to do with intelligence. So it's not an indicator that your child is not going to be successful. And there's actually quite a few reasons why students struggle. And one of the biggest reasons is because of the brain development. The part of the brain that's responsible for executive function skills is the frontal lobe, and specifically the prefrontal cortex, kind of between our eyebrows right here for a visual. And this is actually the last part of the brain to develop and mature. This area of the brain that is responsible for all of these very important skills that we've been talking about. And it actually doesn't finish developing until the age of 25. Which is kind of wild, because that means your middle school, your elementary, middle school, high school, even college student does not have this part of the brain fully developed. So that's going to be part of the reason that these skills are certainly a challenge for your learners, more of a challenge than they are for you as an adult. And these days in school, we are asking students to really do very challenging tasks that require a lot of executive function skills that their brains are not always quite ready for. So this is just the development of the brain is one large reason why these skills are so hard. But there's other reasons why people may struggle.
Yeah. Hannah, can you go back one slide? I'm just going to add something. So the other part is, like Hannah said, because they develop, their development's a bit delayed, right? Our brain develops from back to front, and these skills lie in that frontal lobe, which is the last part of the brain that truly develops. And what we want to make the distinction also here is their chronological age versus their developmental age. So as an example, I saw a lot of people in the chat drop in that their child has ADHD. Well, the research shows that their frontal lobes are about 30% developmentally delayed than a neurotypical brain, right? So what's frustrating about this is that, let's say a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, they may look physically 12 or 15 in all their 15ness and act like it in many different ways. And when it comes to their EF skills developmentally, they may be functioning like a 10-year-old. So that helps to put it into context to bring a little bit more understanding to their behavior, right? And allows us to approach them in a much more calm way to support them. So that's the difference. There's their chronological age, and then there's their developmental age. And then, yeah, we can go to the next slide. So why do they struggle? It could be genetics. So they could have learning differences, ADHD, or an alteration to their brain's development. It could be something that's happening in their environment, right? So mental health issues, depression, anxiety. So when we know that, just as an example, road rage, right? If our amygdala, where our emotions lie, is on hijack, all of our mental resources are trying to keep our brain calm. And so it doesn't dedicate time. I mean, it doesn't dedicate resource to that frontal lobe to really think. And so that's why we see a ton of emotional dysregulation with our children and ourselves. And depression, anxiety, all of that ties in with it, that frontal, our brains just trying to keep us safe and calm, and not enough resources are being dedicated to that part of the brain. If caregivers around struggle with it, so, if we have our own struggles with organization, calendaring, planning, etc., then they are not organically picking up these skills, and it can be exasperated a little bit. And then sleep and nutrition. So when we work with students, we really bring awareness to their sleep and their sleep hygiene, because someone who is sleep deprived, their cognitive performance is going to be impaired a bit. And then also the writing reflex. Well-intentioned parents, and because we're also trying to fix our own anxiety, right? We come in and we try to fix something or drop it off at school or pack up the backpack. And so they miss out on the opportunity to problem solve these skills and let them know that they can bring out these tools and problem solve on their own.
I think a big takeaway here is that it's not your child's fault that they are struggling with these skills. It's really natural, and there's certain factors just mentioned that can make those struggles harder. So this definitely makes me, as I look at my students, have more empathy for the students I'm working with who are really struggling with these various executive functions.
Yeah.
And with that, as you can see, there's so many factors involved in executive function. There's so many specific executive function skills. So we are going to try to share some strategies today that you could use to support your learners. So first, we're going to share some more broad strategies that are kind of ways that you could modify your thinking and working with your learners to support executive function. And then after that, we'll also share some really specific strategies that you might use for various executive function skills. And I want to note that because I know in the chat, people are mentioning a student really struggles with organization or remembering things. So we will later share some strategies for those specific areas, since as we've discussed, everyone's going to have a different child, and each child's going to have very different needs.
And so these strategies will work for kids across any age group. So you can these are quick, practical things you can start using today. The first one is ask. We always want to ask our children instead of assuming we know the answer, right? So we want to really, I learned this from Elaine, Taylor, Kloss, and Diane, but really get curious as to what could be happening. So just as an example, if I say something to a child, right? If I say something, I may assume that they are deliberately not trying to pay attention to me and that they're ignoring me. And really what could be happening is they are so focused on what they're doing right now, or haven't heard me, or need time to process, right? So I can ask, hey, did you capture that? Did you hear that? We always want to ask. Another thing is, for example, if like a lot of parents will say, I just need them to start using a planner, right? I just need them to use the planner. Well, the planner is a solution to a problem, but there are many other systems, structures that they can use to capture their homework. So we can ask them, what would be your preferred way to capture your homework? So that is us not giving them the solution, but asking them what they would prefer. And what that does is it fires up that prefrontal lobe of the brain to get them to think, what would work for me? Right. And so that's what we want. The more we ask them open-ended questions, the more they are forced to think about their own solutions. And that builds an arsenal of confidence and tools that they can pull out independently.
Another strategy is highlighting students' strengths. I think as adults, we more commonly fixate on weaknesses and challenges. Those are the things that really stick out in our minds. So, changing the framework of what we're looking for, and notice what your child's executive function strengths might be. Maybe they are really great at keeping their binder organized, and that's something you can really praise them for, and notice. Or maybe they really do a great job of being flexible when plans change. So noticing those strengths can help create a more positive conversation about executive function skills. And oftentimes, a strength could use it even help them with an area of weakness. For example, if a student really has a strength in being able to keep their binder really organized, but they are struggling with planning, you could work with them in seeing um, how they could utilize that strength of organizing their binder to organizing the things they need to do, maybe coming up with their own creative solution to organizing their tasks they need to do in, like, with post-its or on their own checklists they're creating on their own. So kind of utilizing those strengths and praising them for the strengths as a way to kind of find a solution for the deficit can be helpful. In addition, I think when students have positive feedback, they're going to be much more motivated to keep going and do well. So instead of really fixating on whatever they're struggling with, notice when they do something right, even if it's just a little thing. If you notice that and praise that thing they were doing right, rather than worrying so much about whatever is going wrong, they're much more likely to have a more of a positive cycle and use those strengths more effectively.
Yeah, the other thing about strengths, if a child, our children, they come from a day of school where they've really struggled all day. And when everyone focuses on their weaknesses, it's really hard on their self-confidence and their self-perspective, right? So when we highlight their strengths, they begin to view themselves differently and begin to identify themselves like, hey, this is my thing, this is what I'm good at. Um, the third one is check your writing reflex, which we kind of brushed on earlier. But this is when we jump in to fix the problem, we strip them of the opportunity to develop these skills on their own and problem solve. And the message, well, we're being well intentioned, right? Or trying, sometimes we're in a rush and we're trying to move forward. But what that really does is it sends we're sending the message that you don't have the skills to solve this problem yourself, right? And so what we want to do is show them that they are capable. And if it doesn't work the first time, that's okay. We'll try a second way of doing it. For example, if a child says, I can't find my shoes, where are my shoes, Dad? Rather than us going and getting them for them, we could ask them, if you were shoes, where would your shoes be? Right. So that gets them thinking a little differently and fires up different parts of the brain to allow them to begin to problem solve. And then eventually, after we do this a lot, they learn to become their own coach and ask themselves these questions. It takes time and it happens.
I think that's an important thing to note, is that it takes time. There's, unfortunately, I hate to tell you, there's no like quick fix for any of these challenges. It really is kind of changing the way you're communicating, as well as trying out some of these strategies. So the next thing is embracing mistakes. I know it can be really frustrating when, let's say, your child waits till the very last minute to begin that huge book report or that essay, and all of a sudden they have to pull an all-nighter. They're stressed, you're stressed. It's certainly not a fun moment, and it's really easy to look at that in a very negative light. Um, but we really recommend taking moments like that when there is a bit of a failure, and using that as a learning experience. So instead of getting angry, and of course you can feel frustrated, but instead asking your child, well, what could have done differently? Did you, like, how do you think this went? Did you enjoy having waiting till the last minute and having to stay up late? Is there anything we could have done differently next time? And kind of seeing if you can have your child think of the solution for next time on their own. If they're able to recognize the mistake, they probably didn't like the feeling of procrastinating and waiting till the last minute either. So you want them to kind of recognize that bad feeling and plan what they could do next time. And if the child is the one noting that they're not happy with it and coming up with a potential solution, even if you're kind of guiding them in that direction, they're going to be more likely to actually make that change. And then, of course, the next time there is a big project, you could always remind them, oh, I remember how that was really stressful last time we had this big book report. What did you say you wanted to do differently again? Oh yeah, let's try that. So kind of gently guiding them to make changes based on those mistakes. And even as parents realizing that sometimes those mistakes, those consequences are going to be the greatest opportunities for growth. And
Embracing mistakes, it also comes with us, right? We want to model how we ourselves manage our own mistakes. So that is full transparency, and how sometimes you can even fake the mistakes, and just so that they can hear how you talk yourself out of those mistakes. Darn, I forgot to bring my coffee. I left it at home. Maybe next time, you just model for them how you solve through these mistakes and how you're embracing them, because what that really teaches them is to let go of the shame around the mistake and to fail forward, to think of a different way of doing it. The last one is honor their autonomy and give them some agency. So for this, it would be, if a child says, I want to try this strategy, rather than us telling them, I don't think that's going to work, right? We can just say, all right, I have some concerns around that. Let's give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, when can we check in to come up with a different solution, an alternative, right? But what that's doing is it's allowing them to make their own decisions and letting them know that you're respecting them as their own individual being who can make their decisions. And that alone is going to build that trust between both of you. And gives them a sense of a confidence, whether or not it works, and letting them know your strategy may or may not work, and that's okay. If it doesn't work, we'll find a different strategy. And then the agency as well, right? So as an example, I know it's probably great for me to run a marathon, and I could and begin training for it, but I'm not going to do it just because I know it's good for me. Right. So that's, if someone told me go out and start training for a marathon, I'm not going to do that. Same thing with our children. We want to begin to see them as their own individual beings. So rather than enforcing them, as an example, to practice their violin after school, really asking them, is this something you truly want to do? If the answer is no, you're working yourself up an uphill battle that's only going to really cause some tension in the household. And you're going to constantly be trying to pull them through. But if it comes from them, they are going to be much more likely to work through it, to find ways to get through the bumpy parts of the road. And they're going to be excited. And that's what we want for them to, you want to have their buy-in. It can't be something that we're imposing on them, but something that they truly are asking for. Otherwise, it's just going to cause a ton of friction.
And we know these are all more like mindset shifts that can support executive function. So we really do recommend trying these out. And I will say, I also am a person who really loves concrete strategies as well. So don't worry, we're going to share some more concrete strategies to try along with kind of those overall mindset shifts. So as we talked about, there's a lot of different executive function skills. And so therefore, there's going to be different strategies to help build these skills. So we have a graphic that we're going to share with you, and I'll put it in the chat later when we're doing our Q&A time. And it'll also be emailed out, I believe, because we're not going to go through all of these right now. But we would love to show a few of our favorite strategies for various executive function skills. And I definitely noticed in the chat that some of these skills are ones that are mentioned really are struggles for students. So to mention here, one of my favorite strategies is for planning, the students who struggle with planning ahead, and some simple strategies to support your learner, helping them create a visual system for tracking homework and big events. That could be a family calendar, a dry erase calendar on the refrigerator. It could be their own planner they're going to use. It can be Google Calendar on their phone, but having them create a system that they're going to use, and they're going to actually write down the events the homework assignments, the things they need to pay attention to is really important. We do, of course, as you know, get pushback on that, but as much as possible, like to try to give students autonomy in which system they want to choose. You have to have a system for writing things down, but you get to choose which one it is. Another really, really great strategy for helping students plan and prioritize is chunking, or breaking bigger tasks or projects into smaller, more manageable chunks. So for example, if a student has an essay due, and you know they have an essay due next week, and last time they had an essay due, they waited till the last minute. About a week out, you might ask, could we break this down? What are some smaller parts that make up this essay that you could do one step at a time? So maybe the first step is brainstorming. Next step is writing the intro paragraph, the body paragraph, so forth, so on. So if you break things up into smaller chunks, and even filling those out in an organizer or on a list is really helpful, because that makes a clearer plan for how to accomplish those big tasks, and really makes those tasks a lot less overwhelming. Another executive function skill that I see lots of people are in the chat mention is just messiness and lack of organization in general, whether that's at home, at school, or at school. Some very simple strategies for organization is first organizing the space together. You might be surprised that when you say go clean your room, your child actually doesn't know what that means. They might actually think their room is already clean by their definition of what being clean means. So being really specific about, I want you to put your shoes in the closet, I want you to fold your shirts and put them in the drawer. So giving specific directions, and maybe doing it together, showing what it means to clean the room, so they actually they have a more clear picture. You can also, after you have had this child clean their room, have them take pictures of what the beautiful room, or any workspace this could be, looks like, and put those pictures somewhere that they can refer back to, so that they can have a little visual reminder of how they want that space to look, in case they forget. And we recommend also choosing a regular weekly time to kind of do that check-in organization, whether it's cleaning their room, organizing their backpack, or whatnot. It could even be like a check-in family clean time. Everyone in our family on Sunday evening, we go organize our rooms and prep things for the week. And that's their designated time that they're going to go make sure they put everything back in its place. And so it is important, like the next strategy says, that every item that they have, whether in their binder, in their backpack, in their room, should have a specific place it should go, and they should know where that home is for the object. And if you really want to get buy-in to help students be more motivated to clean, you can also allow them to buy a few organizers or containers they could use for their desk or to store things. Kind of letting them pick out a few fun things like that can kind of increase the buy-in. And then I'll let Jenny talk about a few more.
Yes, we also saw a lot of forgetting their homework, forgetting what I said, missing instructions. And so that is working memory. And how you see this in academic subjects is students who struggle with math a lot, because they're manipulating a lot of information mentally, as well as students who struggle with written expression. Right, all that's really taxing on their working memory, both math and writing, because they are juggling the question, what they want to say, how they want to solve the problem, the sequence, etc. And so how you see it at home could possibly be, how did they forget that? I just gave them those instructions and they didn't do it, right? What, mom, what? So working memory, a quick practical thing you could do is ask them to repeat it back to you. What did I just say? What that does is it forces them to be much more engaged with the conversation, and to think about, what was it that you just said, or can you tell me what I said in your own words, right? Can you repeat that? So if I say, go brush your teeth, put your shoes away, and put your pajamas on, repeat it back to me, so that they are much more active with the information. If they say, I'm going to remember this, don't worry, mom. As an example, I had a student yesterday who his teacher told him he got to bring a book. He was like, I'm going to bring it. Like, that's easy. It's not even homework. I'll remember that. So I said, well, how will you remember that? And so they all come up with really clever ways. My former way would have been, hey, just put a Post-it note and I'll call it a day. This student went through the lengths of taking a screenshot of a book and making it his background on the phone. whatever works is what works, and we're going to honor that, right? And it worked. He took his book home to school. So that's just a quick way. So how will you remember it? And ask, repeat back to me. And then we also saw a lot of task initiation. And again, Hannah and I are just being really brief on these. We could go deep on these, but task initiation is the ability to start something when you've intended to. So that there's a ton that what that really says is it's not, I hate to use the word procrastination or not being motivated, because all motivation to me is just you were motivated by something else. And whatever feelings or histories involved with that task are feelings that you do not want to endure at the moment. And so something else is winning, right? For example, me putting away the holiday decorations, I would much rather sit and watch Netflix than get up and put everything away and put it back in my garage, etc. So it's the emotion that's tied to it that you don't want to deal with, whether it's boredom, difficulty, anything. So some ways for us to support our students here is to give them clear directions, because the other part of task initiation is it's just whatever, how to get from point A to point B is very vague. So they don't have that internal dialogue to walk them through it. So it could be, hey, can you let's walk, what's the first step, what's the second step, then what, so they can begin to form a clear image of how they're going to get from point A to point B. You'll notice students who have ADHD or semi-app struggle, if they have a clear image of what they need to do and completely can't understand, they are much more likely to do, because now they're feeling competent. Now it's not vague anymore. And then the other part is start with something easy, right? So if you know what, if you don't want to get started on homework because you're trying to put off that essay, what is something you're much more likely to do? Just get going on something. How can you make this easy for yourself? That's a way. A quick, easy way, just to, as an example, is some students really like working with the body double. It's just comforting for them. So, a parent could be next to them writing emails, checking, whatever, cooking in the kitchen, and they're next to you just doing their homework. Just having that presence there is enough to get them going a little bit.
Awesome. So as we said, as we kind of go into our question and answer, if you have more specific questions about one of these skills or your child, we'll hopefully dive into that as well. So we are going to go ahead and we'll stop talking and listen to you a little bit and hear some of your questions. But I wanted to say you're welcome to reach out to us at any time. Of course, both of us work with lots of families. And so if you do feel like you need more specific help with your learner, we are both here for you to reach out to. And IDALA also has amazing resources about dyslexia and learning differences in general. So you're welcome to reach out to us, and you can expect that in the chat in just one moment. And I think we'll go ahead and stop the screen share so we can see everyone. What do you think, Barb? And then have some questions.
Yeah, I think that's good. Let's go through the questions. There's some in the chat first.
Awesome. One thing I noticed in the chat, I noticed a few people, just not necessarily a question, but something I noticed, saying they noticed their child struggles with executive function skills more at home than at school. And one reason I kind of just thought I would note for that is sometimes students, when they're at school, they're surrounded by peers who are doing the things they need to do. So they kind of can look around and be like, oh yeah, everyone's like putting their backpack away and doing their work. I'm going to follow along and get started. So at school, there's more of that pressure to have stronger executive function skills because they see their classmates doing it. And then we sometimes do see when it gets to the home, they're kind of exhausted from the day. So they're like, I've worked so hard. I don't want to worry about those things. And they also might not see someone else, like a classmate, doing like practicing those executive function skills. So that definitely makes it harder. So I would say that's just one reason for kind of noticing that different home versus school.
Yeah, the other part I was going to say is if your child has an IEP at school or a profile in their private setting, then those interventions are being theoretically, hopefully, put in place by their teacher. And so now we got to think of, okay, would be some IEP interventions that I could do in the home to support this? Just because they're missing that, right? At school, they may have a little bit more support there. And then at home, we expect them, hey, you look like a 12-year-old, you should be doing this. It's not a should, it's a can't. They can't yet.
Yeah. And I see, okay, Barb asked, can you explain more about the writing reflex? Jenny, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so the writing reflex is when we jump in to try to fix we provide the solution, or we just do it for them, right? And by the way, if parents need a little more coaching, I do teach parent coaching classes with Elaine and Diane Taylor class, which is a behavior management training class, but we'll be doing that again in the fall if you guys want to reach out, in the spring, sorry. But the writing, and this is a big part of what we talk about, which is why I thought of it. But the writing reflex is when we just jump in to fix the problem. So I can give an example of, okay, the packing of the backpack. I'm just going to go ahead and pack up the backpack because it makes things easier. Or I'm going to put away all the things on the island. Oftentimes they forget to put away their snacks, whatever they've used for in the kitchen, they forget to put it away. So I'm just going to put it away. Well, if we continue to do these things for them, then they don't build the awareness that they are leaving things out on their own, etc. Someone is doing something for them. And so what we want to do is say, bring awareness to that. What we want to do is make the unconscious conscious, bring awareness to that, and then ask them, what support do you need? Perhaps they don't even realize that they're leaving the things out on the island, right? They are done, they got their snack, they're moving on. And so if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So is there a way for us to collaborate together to remind you that you have left things out and it's unfair for me to be putting things away for you? So that's the writing reflex. This is what I mean when it takes time, because these skills don't develop overnight. And it takes much more effort on our end to be patient and ask them the questions, to collaborate with them rather than just doing it ourselves. I can give another example. If a student forgets their lunch at home, right, which often happens, or their iPad charger, something, perhaps you drop it off the first time. And then afterwards you ask them, how are you going to remember to bring this to school? I'm open to dropping it off once, and I'm not going to drop it off again. So what can we do? What would be helpful to do? And how can I support you all?
Those are great. I'd say, Francis, thank you so much for that, the podcast recommendation in the chat, the opportunity gap. That sounds like a really neat podcast. Okay, one other question I see from Ben. Can you comment about struggles with social skills and how EF relates to friendships? I'll start and then let you jump in, Jenny. I think that it's important to note that executive function is not just related to our academics or home life, but it can certainly impact a student's social skills and their relationships. And a couple of ways I've seen that is, I think first of all, if a student is, struggling to attend or with working memory, they might have challenges like in a longer conversation with their peers. If they're getting distracted and struggling with attention, we see that. Another area is that, and sometimes in the classroom when students are working together in small groups, they're working on tasks together. And, if one student is struggling more with initiating a task and getting started, and kind of struggling with some sustained attention, that can feel distracting to their peers and kind of cause some conflict amongst peers. So I think those are some just examples of ways we've seen executive function skills like negatively impact social situations. So if that's an area where you see executive function skills impacting your learner, I think talking with them about specific strategies in terms of socialization that would be helpful, ways to attend to conversations. Some strategies for task initiation might be helpful for them in the classroom, and kind of even bringing to their attention, how might a friend feel when this happens, or how do you feel when the friend is doing this, and kind of ask those big questions in regards to how their executive function skills are impacting socialization. And definitely jump in if you have more to say there, Jenny, because I know there's probably a lot more I could say about that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, will you see this much more in their late elementary school years and then middle school a lot, and then in high school? And what we notice is students who have trouble with impulsivity will just jump in and interrupt, whether that's a friend or in the classroom, right? They're impulsive, and so they don't remember to raise their hand. Other times it's they want to hyper focus and talk about something that's of interest to them, or it's managing their emotions, right? If someone says something and they disagree, it's very blunt how they portray that disagreement, or they just get really upset and it's evident in their actions. And so what that tells us is they don't have that self-talk to regulate themselves and take a bird's eye view of themselves. And taking that bird's eye view of themselves is the last EF skill that develops. So that's what makes this even more challenging. For students, what we really want to do is bring awareness to them. So I've seen a lot of parents that we work with whose child interrupts a lot, and the parent, again, I'm not putting blame on anyone, but kind of gloss over it, conversation. That is not building awareness for that child. And so what we want to do is say, you interrupted me, or how can I let you know that you're interrupting me? Because if they're doing it with you, they're doing it with everyone else. And in middle school, their peers matters so much. This is the thing that matters to them the most. And what happens is people start noticing, and that's when you start seeing the friction between friends. So I, if this is happening, really do. And overall, though, what we really just want to do is bring awareness. And then Ken, I did see that you were asking if they struggle with EF. Is that an indication that they have ADHD? Not necessarily, but it is something to keep in mind and look into, because people who have ADHD do struggle with executive function skills. It does not mean that if you struggle with EF skills, though, that you have ADHD. But if you are seeing some signs of kind of more scattered, or we get a lot of calls that my child is brilliant and they're really struggling, right? If you're seeing these signs, it's best to seek a professional's opinion and get an assessment done, just to rule out anything. Because if it is ADHD, if you can intervene quickly, that's going to give them the tools. The earlier we start to intervene, the more they develop these skills faster, right? Just like with reading. And so if, it's best to rule something out, it's something in your gut is telling you there may be a sign of ADHD.
Yeah. And I see from Richard, would love to hear some strategies for impulse control and self-control. And I know many parents do have anecdotes about how their child just can't stop playing video games or is always on their phone. That seems to be a common concern for parents. And I think I would first note the reason why are video games or iPads so addicting? And really it's because there's this, as soon as they're playing a video game or they're scrolling through TikTok, they're getting like this instant dopamine rush, and they're all of a sudden their brain's getting all this pleasure hormone, so they're really enjoying it. They don't want to stop. It is addicting because their brain is sending them that chemical that I'm having a great time, I want to keep going. And they're certainly not going to get that same dopamine rush if they're working on their math homework, or most likely they're not, or cleaning their room. So we have to note that these things certainly do have the tendency to even make our brains want to keep doing them. So it's not that there's anything abnormal about that or wrong with your child. These kind of things are natural. And it kind of depends on the age, I'd say. I mean, for younger students, I do think having a boundaries of figuring out what time of day is it going to be best to use iPads or video games, maybe choosing a time after homework or other important tasks have been completed. And so setting some of those boundaries can certainly be helpful, especially when students are younger. And I'd say for older students, middle school and high schooler, as much as possible, it's nice to get them into the conversation as well, and discuss with them, well, what are the other things what are the other things you need to do, and kind of making a plan for their afternoon, and see if they can plan when they are going to play video games, kind of letting them have some bit of a choice in when the video games are going to fit in, if they can fit in their other things first. Another thing I would note is that oftentimes students don't realize how long they're spending on their phone or on video games, and that kind of goes into the executive function skill of time management and time understanding. A lot of students I work with will say, I think I've played video games for 10 minutes, and then I looked at the clock and it turns out it had been 2 hours. So it can be helpful, to have them actually set a timer and a visual timer for how long they want to play, because the time really does slip away from us when we're doing those types of things. So that can be really helpful. And even just like bringing the idea of understanding of time into other things you do can be helpful, whether it's making an estimate for how long you think homework's going to take, and then actually tracking to see how correct you are, making an estimate for how long do I think I'm going to play video games versus how long I actually did. So kind of bringing some of those ideas, strategies for understanding time can be helpful as well, because at the end of the day, students are going to want to use their devices. They're going to want to do those things. So it's sort of coming back to that overall idea of bringing awareness to what needs to get done first. How could I perhaps use video games as a reward to help me initiate the harder tasks, and how can I manage them wisely?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think we do a lot of work with designing an alignment between parents and children. And part of the work that we do is around video games, right? Video games, technology. This is the world we live in now. It's like food, and it's figuring out a way for them to take it in a healthy manner. It's like that ride in between, because just like food, right? We don't want too much or too little. It's the in between. And we're not trying to tell you stop playing with your iPad or your video games, etc. We get that this is the world that we live in, and this is how you socialize and form connections at school. And we understand that, right? And we also, we want to teach self-control and self-management. And so something quick that, with some support, because they hear it differently from parents, truthfully, but it's forming an alliance as to what will happen if you're not off the iPad at the time that you say you are. And then, like Hannah said, it's really getting curious. Is this truly a issue with transitioning, flexibility? Is it time blindness, right? Is it time planning? What is going on that's getting in the way of them being able to pull themselves out? And then rather than imposing a punishment on them, it's, having a conversation and being proactive with them. What would it look like if you're not off the iPad with blank ABC is done, right? That again, all of this, your child will always hear everything a lot better if there's a strong relationship between the two of you, a positive relationship. And so these strategies help support that.
That's great. Well, this was really, really wonderful tonight. Hannah and Jenny, thank you so much. I think it was very practical for all of us. And it's encouraging, especially if we've got kids who really struggle with this in a very big way, that they can develop these skills. And especially when you're looking at brain development, they're not there yet, especially if they're a student, or maybe somebody you're married to, they can still learn those skills. We're all laughing about that one. So if you want to, one part for you to know, as part of our parent groups, we always have time at the end if people want to hang out afterwards. If you've got questions just regarding your kids, we've got, Hannah and Jenny and I can hang out if you've got some questions, just to help you through something, briefly, we can do that. And just help you think it through. So you're welcome to do that. But don't forget the March 4th conference is coming up at UCLA. Go on our website, see more about it. It's going to be wonderful, wonderful. It's in person. Also, we want to thank Hannah and Jenny, and also Katie, our admin, who's been letting people in, sending out the emails. So thank you, Katie. And keep abreast of what's coming up. Katie was sending out information about the upcoming parent groups this spring. So keep your eyes open for that. And thank you so much for being here. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to stick around if you want to ask any more.
Yeah.